the first thing to do is to spread hope. We are one people across the region, but we face the same problems. The real effect for the region in terms of COVID-19 have been the measures, the consequences of the measures that were taken by governments in the region as a way of avoiding the spread of COVID-19. When the measures took place in March 2020, it was with lockdowns, and communities that have populations that live largely from hand to mouth were asked and required without notice and or preparation to stop all work, to stop all activities that gave them a livelihood as a way of staunching the spread of COVID-19. That, of course, has had a profound effect on incomes, on livelihoods, and on households in terms of their ability to take care of themselves during the last 1 year. We also have to remember how governments in the region enforced those measures. Typically, the enforcement of the COVID-19 measures was arbitrary. Governments gave themselves very, very arbitrary powers of policing the populations as a way of enforcing the measures. There were many cases of significant amounts of violence. There were deaths across countries. In Kenya, for example, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, in their last reporting on the measures and how they were enforced, reported at least 21 confirmed deaths during that period. Then there were other measures to do with how quarantine was carried out. Quarantine caused very, very significant hardship. People were not given information. The places of quarantine were not prepared. If you turn to the more political developments within the region, we had elections in Tanzania in 2020. The campaigns towards the elections and the build-up towards the elections had overtones of insecurity. Tanzania has gone through 5 years of significant amounts of insecurity that is the result of the activities of state agencies. We had then the return into Tanzania of Tundu Lissu, the leader of the opposition, who had faced a life-threatening situation when he had been shot. And we then had this election that whose results have obliterated the opposition. So Tanzania moves from a multi-party state with a robust opposition into a situation where overnight there is no opposition in either Zanzibar or mainland Tanzania. Then the election in Tanzania is followed a month or so later, in January of 2021, by an election in Uganda, which has been now extremely violent. The build-up to that election was extremely violent, and I think it was not difficult to see what the results were going to be. But that those two electoral situations have provided a flavor for what is going on in the region. And you will recall that they were preceded at the start of November by the conflict, the internal but regionalized conflict in Ethiopia, which has had a military expedition in the Tigray region, in which other states have been sucked in, either as recipients of refugees in the case of the Sudan, or in the case of Eritrea as a country that has brought its own troops to take place in that conflict, even though their presence up to now remains undeclared. So all those incidents are part of a microcosm of the difficulties that we faced in the last 1 year in this region. It was thought that a referendum might be unlikely, but it is now clear that there will be a referendum because more than the requisite number of counties have approved the bills that will be the subject of the referendum. So that referendum will obviously shape the election itself, and but the referendum has the consequence first of creating and confirming another round of political polarization in the country. So that, I think, is the first effect that we have, and that is likely to carry itself to the election itself. But the second thing is the referendum opens up the Constitution 2010 for the first time for amendment. The Constitution will be amended, and the idea then that this is a perfect constitution is going to be undermined with any amendment that comes. If you remember the previous constitution that was finally removed in 2010, one of the long-term political excuses by the leaders had been that the reason why they ruled the country as badly as they did is because they had a bad constitution. That was the typical excuse during KANU, that we have a bad constitution, so don't blame us for how badly we govern this country. So that's the second consequence, in my view, of the fact that we're going to get into a referendum. It's going to give us a constitution whose content will be contested and support for which will not be as universal as there has been for the current Constitution 2010. The third consequence of the referendum is that it will shape the actual election itself. It will shape it in a way that we don't currently know, but we can guess how that is going to happen. The group that prevails in the referendum hopes that it is going to use that momentum, or whatever momentum it gains as a result of prevailing in the referendum, to carry itself to the election and therefore get power on the basis of the constitution that they would have passed as a result of the referendum. Because there is a level of what's the word I would use? I would use the word vacuousness. There's something vacuous, something empty about the content of the referendum. You're going to get power arrangements and a mandate for power in the 2022 election that is going to be also relatively vacuous. It's not going to be based on anything tangible or anything that can rally the public behind itself. So I think one is looking at a difficult political future for the country. The outlook is not promising. I think what has happened in East Africa confirms the standpoint of that literature, that there is no inevitability about democracy. Democracy has, as a system of government, widely regarded as the least inconvenient, has got to be fought for, and once achieved, protected with as much care, concern, and force as the fighting that went into establishing a democratic praxis in the first place. It's all these reversals that we've seen. I mean, if you start with Kenya, for example, you had elections in 2002 that were very democratic and hailed internationally, and violence in the subsequent election. And we've had challenges notwithstanding the reforms that were instituted into and resulting in the 2010 constitution. You've had reversals, and Kenya goes back to the same place where it had been before these reforms took place. The same thing with Ethiopia. When Prime Minister Abiy came to power, it was first of all very sudden and unexpected, but he came to power in a country that was in the pain of long-term governance problems, but also very significant economic situation. Very significant economic challenges. So one thought that those circumstances would create a situation where Ethiopia could chart a new path that avoids what Abiy found in power. But what is happening right now is a confirmation that Ethiopia hasn't moved very far from the situation pre-Prime Minister Abiy, and you could have a situation of generalized large-scale violence as a way of all the groups that feel excluded or under-included in the current political situation staking a claim on the Ethiopian state. In my construction of a future, I was going to start with an assertion that the first thing to do is to spread hope. That doesn't sound like something tangible, but it is. There's an old sailor song that has a verse: each day ends in darkness, but hope never ends. So we need to spread in East Africa a reality that even though the days that we face end in darkness, that should never be the end of our hope, and spread hope and optimism among populations that better days will come. Armed with hope rather than despair, people can start thinking about solutions to their problems, because those problems are ultimately solvable. So a recognition that our region does not need messiahs. We just need ordinary, fallible human beings. We will make the mistakes, all of us together. We will learn from those mistakes, and we will construct better societies for ourselves. A message to populations, very simple like that, to the effect that we are our own saviors and we are the controllers of our own destiny. It's to then see the need for solidarity based on the fact that we are one people across the region, but we face the same problems across the region. So getting our people-to-people solidarity, the kind of solidarity governments have for themselves already, and which they use and leverage to create this undesirable political situation. If people then were able to realize what power lies in solidarity among themselves, that would be a good starting point in keeping up hope.